Hello and welcome back to part 2 of our Revealed Reality Bible study on the Gospel of Mark. If you haven't already done so, hit the website www.wtfo.biz. Click on the Revealed Reality Bible study link right there on the home page. You can view all of the video files in this lesson and also view or download and print the PDF file or handout that goes with this. We continue now. Before we actually begin to read the text of the Gospel of Mark, we want to condition ourselves. We want to have an understanding of what the original audience understood and how they would have received this writing, versus how we have come to understand the writings through years of interpretation, including 2 great councils where they voted on what we would believe. I'm not speaking blasphemy, I'm speaking history. So, we've got to remember, when we approach the Gospels, right now we're on the Gospel of Mark, that the gospel texts are not day-to-day diaries like we know today. If we wrote a diary and it could include our life or the life of somebody else, we would be given day-to-day events. When we hit up Facebook, we're posting what's happening in our lives right now, tomorrow, next week, etc. Well, the Gospels are not day-to-day diaries like that. The Gospels really are a result of a growing, diverse interpretation of Jesus from the perspectives of his faithful disciples. And we'll notice that the Gospel of Mark gives us the core of some of the events that took place in the life of Jesus, but each of the 4 Gospels tell a slightly different story, or they add something slightly different to the story of Jesus. So they're not day-to-day diary accounts. The Gospels are shaped by the people who tell the stories for their particular circumstances. For instance, the Gospel of Mark, we believe, was written right after the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, the casting out of Jewish people from the Palestine area, and they were forbidden ever to return to the city of Jerusalem or the Palestine area. The temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed. And so they're trying to make some sense of what was this all about. And so you'll read the overtones in the Gospel of Mark, the pain, the loss regarding this tragedy of the Roman Empire destroying their beloved city and their beloved temple. Also, we have to remember that most readers today read the Gospels from a default position, which is the reading of the Gospels from the Nicaea perspective that Jesus is both human and divine. But early Christians would have thought this was ridiculous. Early Christians would not have had a clue as to what we were talking about if we said to them, Jesus is both human and divine. For early first century Christians, important to them were questions such as when Jesus says, I and the Father are one. Well, to the early Christian communities that first received the Gospels, first in oral form, then in written form, when Jesus says, I and the Father are one, they would have interpreted and received it as Jesus saying, I and the Father are one in will. We're one in purpose. But by the time we roll around to the Council of Nicaea 300 years ago, it has now morphed into Jesus meant that I and the Father are of the same substance. I'm not just his agent, his anointed one. John goes on to say it in his Gospels, Jesus is God. But that would have been far-fetched, ridiculous to the very first Christians that received this writing. Nothing in the Gospels talk about Jesus having two natures, being both human and divine. And if I'm wrong and you're viewing this, please hit me on my website. Matter of fact, go to the homepage and hit the Holler at the Pastor link, and you show me in the Gospel of Mark or any of the other Gospels where it says that Jesus has two natures, both human and divine. So what we want to do, we want to attempt to read these texts without the two nature perspective. I know it's difficult because it's all we know. It's what's been handed down to us. But we want to try to attempt to read these texts pre-Council of Nicaea. In other words, before it was established through debate and vote that Jesus is both human and divine. Now, am I saying that what was established at Nicaea is not true, is not correct? I'm not saying that at all, but I am pointing out there was a time in early Christianity where people did not have this same belief. That was a belief that developed after years of the practice of Christianity. And so it's not, for me, a matter of choosing whether I'm going to believe the creeds. The Nicene Creed and the Creed of Chalcedon affirms the two natures of Jesus. It's not a matter of whether I'm going to choose to believe that or whether I'm going to choose to believe the Gospels. It's really both and, because the Gospels give the core information. And again, Christians after 300 years began to think about this and work through this. And I do want to say led by the Holy Spirit in part. And they began to understand the deeper elements of the faith, such as the nature of Jesus Christ. But again, for this exercise in the Gospel of Mark, what we want to do is to train ourselves to read the Gospel according to Mark. What did Mark actually say? Not what did Mark say and us looking through the lenses of Nicaea. We want to put ourselves in the position of the very first audience. All right. Now we know the historical context of the Gospels have to do with the post-70s communities of Christian. We know again the Roman Empire was in control. They had already destroyed the city of Jerusalem, or particularly the temple in Jerusalem. They had kicked all the Jewish people out of Jerusalem, and so they're scattered throughout the Roman Empire in various communities. Rome, for instance, Syria, and even Galilee, which was a predominantly Gentile area, though there was at one time a large Jewish population there. Okay, let's talk about the literary context of the Gospel of Mark. Mark was the first known gospel to compile stories and sayings of Jesus and to the present form in the Bible. Before then, we just had sayings of Jesus. Jesus taught this, Jesus taught that, but this is the first time now we've got the teachings of Jesus now enshrouded in narrative form, stories and plots and themes and places. And we also have to remember, as we conclude part 2b, that the Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, circulated in the Christian communities in oral forms for many, many years. And it wasn't again until maybe 100 years after the ascension of Jesus that the first gospel was actually written down. So even the Gospel of Mark, before it was written down, it had circulated in Christian communities for many, many years. And we believe that the story that was circulating in the Gospel of Mark began somewhere around 70 CE. We'll be right back with part 2C of the Gospel of Mark.